Alright, so today we're going to talk about the quadratic formula. And so if you watched the previous video, I talked a little about the three strategies that we've already learned so far. Isolating the variable, factoring using the snowflake or asterisk method, and also completing the square. All of these have their advantages, but they also have their disadvantages. The quadratic formula, once again, like completing the square, is going to work for any quadratic. Okay? So any quadratic, anything in the form ax squared plus bx plus c is going to work for this. If you watched the prior video as well, there's another link to a video that shows you the quadratic formula actually is just a condensed formula version of completing the square. But at the end of the day, here's one of the most important formulas, definitely in this class, but almost in algebra overall, is this formula right here. So it lists as the fraction, so if you want to solve for x, it's going to be the fraction negative b plus or minus. Remember, that means there are two actual answers. There's a positive version and a minus version. So plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac, and all of that is over 2a. Now the a, the b, and the c are actually the coefficients and or the numbers that appear in front of each term in your quadratic. And that's going to be the most important thing when you're organizing these problems. So let's take a look at an example using the quadratic formula. So if we look at problem number 1 here, it's the equation x squared plus 2x minus 8 equals 0. Now, to use the quadratic formula, you do have to make sure, kind of like the snowflake method, that everything is on the left-hand side of your equation, meaning one side should equal 0. Before you set up the quadratic formula, however, I would definitely identify what your a, your b, and your c terms are going to be. Those are always going to be numbers, and it's the number or coefficient in front of each variable. So in front of the x squared, there's nothing written here. And so we're going to say that that a then is actually a 1. Our b, on the other hand, is listed there, and that's going to be a positive 2. Note the plus sign in front there. And lastly, my c, because it's a minus 8, that means my c is going to be negative 8. So this is where our quadratic formula is going to come from. So let's take a look at the formula here once again. So here it is. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to substitute my b here, my a, my c, and my a. So let me do that substitution for you and show you what that should look like. So here I've performed the substitutions. I've replaced my b's with a 2 here and a 2 here. My a is a 1 and my c is a negative 8. So if we look back to the quadratic formula up top here, I've performed these substitutions. My answer is sitting right here in front of me. All I have to do now is some simplification. The number one part of this quadratic formula that you need to simplify before you do anything is going to be that radicand, the stuff that's inside the radical. So to do that, remember that we have to use our order of operations. So we have to first take care of the exponent, which means we have to take 2 squared. So I'm going to rewrite here below the simplified square root. So the 2 squared here is going to be 4. And now to get the remainder part of this, it's a minus, but then I'm going to take 4 times 1 times negative 8. And what that's going to be is a negative 32. Now I already have a minus. So if I'm subtracting a negative 32, well really, that's like adding. So really, I'm going to go ahead and merge them together and make that a plus 32. Now the rest of the formula still has to be written out. I still have my negative 2. I still have my plus or minus. And then in the bottom, 2 times 1 is just going to be 2. So what I have now is a more simplified version of my answer. But I must continue forward as well here. 4 plus 32 is going to be 36. Still divided by 2. Well, if the 36 was not able to be simplified, you would actually stop and say that this is your final answer. Yes, you could get decimals for this. Yes, you could do other things, but this is where you would stop. But the good news is 36 actually can be simplified. 36, the square root of 36, is just going to be 6. And so now I have something like this, negative 2 plus or minus 6 over 2. Now please don't forget that this plus or minus really means, if I split it up, that I have two answers. negative 2 plus 6 over 2, and negative 2 minus 6 over 2. And so if I go to simplify these now, remember that we have to add the numerator first, and then I'll divide by 2. 6 plus negative 2 is 4, and 4 divided by 2 is just 2. Negative 2 minus 6 is negative 8, and negative 8 divided by 2 is negative 4. So 2 and negative 4 are actually going to be my two answers here. I got two whole numbers as my answer, which actually tells me one other thing. This problem could have been factored. We actually could have used the snowflake or asterisk method to solve for this. But this once again shows you, and you can try that on your own if you want to pause the video and try this problem with the snowflake method, you should get the same answers of 2 and negative 4. This example, though, proves that the quadratic formula will indeed work with any type of quadratic. We're going to take a look at one more example in this video, and we're actually going to skip over to number 4 on your worksheet. So we've tried number 1, and we're going to try number 4. Now, before I start number 4, I want you to remember this. In number 4, we're going to need to make sure that everything is moved over to the same side. So I'm going to have to add this 4 to both sides, leaving me with x squared minus 4x plus 4 equals 0. Now, there's a possibility that this actually could be factored. But once again, what I want to do is show you that the quadratic formula indeed is going to work. So I need to identify my A, my B, and my C here. My A is in front of the x squared, and since I don't know that, it's a 1. B is going to be the number in front of x, which is going to be negative 4, and C is just going to be my 4. This is a very important step to setting up your quadratic formula so that you won't make any mistakes when you perform your substitution. Another helpful thing that I'm going to recommend you do for all of these is to write the formula out first. So I'm going to write the formula out first. And so now what I have to do is I have to substitute in my variables here. So my B, since it's negative 4, I'm going to put a negative 4 in. Now something interesting happens here. Since I already have a minus sign in front, I'm going to take a minus negative 4. Which really means I'm just substituting in a plain old positive 4. Plus or minus. My b squared. Now be careful with this as well. Since the b is negative, you are squaring the negative 4. And so we definitely need to write that in parentheses. And then I'm going to fill the rest of this out. So minus 4. And then my a is 1. My c is 4. And we're going to divide that all by 2a. So 2 times 1, which is just going to be a 2. Now, if you want to write 2 times 1 like that, that's fine. Especially as you're learning this, that's not a problem. So now let's begin to simplify this some more. Once again, the first thing that I would simplify in any of these problems is this. Okay? That's the first thing that I would do. And so the first thing is you got to take negative 4 squared. Negative 4 squared is negative 4 times negative 4. B squared should always be a positive number, and so that's a positive 16. Now I'm going to have minus, and then 4 times 1 times 4. Well, 4 times 1 is 4, and 4 times 4 is 16. So I get 16 minus 16. The rest of it I'm going to just rewrite. Don't forget your plus minus. And in the bottom I get a 2. Now we begin to simplify this problem as well. We have to continue on. 16 minus 16, again, working with that radical, is actually just going to give me a 0. And the square root of 0, as I just went ahead and obviously wrote, the square root of 0 is just 0. And so once again, my two answers is 4 plus 0 and divided by 2, and 4 minus 0 divided by 2. But when you add a 0 and subtract a 0, you're really not changing the number. And so actually what I end up with is one answer here. The answer would just be 2, because I would take 4 and divide it by 2 to get my answer of 2 here. What I'm going to ask you to do now is to pause this video at this point, and I want you to try the quadratic formula for number 2, which we didn't do, the 3x squared problem. I want you to try it for number 3, and I want you to try it for number 5. So pause this video now, complete these 3 problems. If you're in class, make sure you check with me or somebody in the room for your answers, and once you've checked, press play again for the results and for the solutions to this. So at this point, you should have tried numbers 2, 3, and 5. Here are the solutions we have. So for number 2, my apologies, the big change here from the two examples I've gone over with you in the video is that the square root ends up not being a perfect square. So if we look down here, I set up my quadratic formula, I plug in my a, b, and my c value, I do a little bit of math to crunch the numbers in the square root, but 100 minus 60 is 40. And so when we look down here to the rest of the answer, I need to break that 40 down, just like we've been breaking square roots down in this class. I break the 40 down into 4 and 10, and then the 4 breaks into 2 and 2. So that means square root of 40 is the same thing as 2 root 10. So with that being said, my answer, 10 plus or minus 2 root 10 over 6, would be a final answer. However, going back to some more skills that we talked about early in the class, 10, 2, and 6, all three terms have a GCF of 2. And so I can factor a 2 out of this. And we'll look at this more directly in class 2. So that's going to leave me with a 5, a 1, which I wouldn't write anything, and then down here a 3. I'm going to break this problem down a little bit more in detail, especially if you have trouble going from this step right here to this step down here. To this step down here. So if you got this answer up top and didn't get this answer on bottom, talk to one of us, and we can talk to you a little bit about why that is. Moving on with the next example, number 3. Well, number 3 was a lot like the problems we've done in the past, where we went about solving it, and we end up with a perfect square inside. In this case, a square root of 36. So again, quadratic formula, which I want you to write for every problem. Plug your numbers in, simplify again to get the 36, and that gives me the 6. Once again, if you're really having a hard time seeing how to go from this to these answers of 1 and 5, let one of us know. But basically what I did was I took -4, I added 6 for the first possible answer. That's 2. 2 divided by 2 is 1. -4 minus 6, however, is -10. And -10 divided by 2 gives me -5. The last example that we were to look at in this video was number 5. Now, something different happens in number 5 as well. So again, set up my quadratic formula, plug my numbers in, square it, and then you multiply these out to get the 4, and something happens that's not happened before. Our square root is now negative. So at this point, you're really stuck. Number 1, you can't simplify 3, but we did learn what to do when you have a negative inside the square root. What I want you to do for now, and this is all you have to do with it, is simply write it as an imaginary number, just like we learned in the past. So that negative is going to move to the outside, and we're going to now call it I. And so your final answer for this particular one is -1 plus or minus I root 3 over 4. Now, what do you do with this? Well, that's a topic for another class. Again, go back to pause this video, rewind this video, and revisit any of these examples that we've gone through. Once you've completed the video, there is an assignment listed below on Canvas, or you can check in with me in class for a more direct schedule of assignments.